Matthew 20, please turn to Matthew chapter 20. I'll actually start reading in the last verse of chapter 19, and then I will read chapter 20 through verse 16. So chapter 19, verse 30, hear now God's holy and inspired word. This is Jesus speaking. He says, "But many who are first will be last, and the last first. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And to them he said, 'You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you.' So they went. Going out again about the sixth hour and the ninth hour, he did the same. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, 'Why do you stand here idle all day?' They said to him, 'Because no one has hired us.' He said to them, 'You go into the vineyard too.' And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, 'Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first.' And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, 'These last worked only 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat.' But he replied to one of them, 'Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first, and the first last.' The grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of our God stands forever." Thursday evening, Lacey and I were walking our dog around the neighborhood. Typically, this is our chance to catch up with one another at the end of the day, and Lacey was telling me about, she had worked that day. She was telling me about a dietitian who was working, a coworker. This dietitian was working for 2 hospitals, and one hospital paid more than the other hospital. And she asked the lesser paying hospital if, she can't work, she needs more money. And so she asked them to raise her wage, maybe $2 or $3 an hour more. And the hospital wouldn't do it. So she quit the lesser paying hospital and logically went to work for the place that's going to pay her more. And it makes perfect sense, of course. But then the hospital who lost her can't find anyone to work now. So they're offering a $10,000 sign-on bonus, and it's obviously because they wouldn't raise by a couple dollars an hour the wages to this other employee, and it's obviously a terrible business practice to lose an employee over a couple of dollars an hour, and now you have to pay more and more because you can't find someone. And it's frustrating, and hearing Lacey talk about this, it's clearly unfair to the employee who was there. And she had asked for more, a matching salary to where her other place of employment was. She wanted to stay there and work, but now they are going to give more to someone else who wasn't there to begin with. And it's not fair. It's not fair. This woman, it seems to me, deserved better treatment from that hospital, and the hospital was foolish in how they handled things. And then Lacey told me about another hospital raising their minimum wage, raising the minimum wage to a rate that is just shy of what you might make if you had a master's degree. So you're a new employee with a master's degree, and you've invested time and money and all this effort in pursuit of study and a professional degree, and then all this training, and your pursuit is worth basically no more than someone who has no training at all. And it's not fair. It's not fair. Now, Lacey was not complaining to me. She was just telling me some of what is happening in the health industry and some of the interesting things she sees. I'm the one complaining. It's frustrating. No wonder insurance is so expensive, because there's just chaos and none of it is fair. And then while we're walking our dog, because we're talking about this, walking the dog, and we're walking our dog, and I don't know if you remember, many, many months ago, I told you about an elderly man that drives around our neighborhood and just yells at people. Well, of course, he pulls up beside us and starts yelling at us. And it's dark, we're walking on the other side of the street, he's way over on, the other side, and he says, he could have run us over because he couldn't see us, and he's yelling at us, and I am not happy because we're well out of his way, and it just made me mad, and we're having a lovely walk, and that is not what we deserved, to be yelled at while we're walking along the street. No reasonable person would have pulled up and yelled at us. It's not fair, not fair. And then also this week, it's a rough week, right? I had purchased this coffee machine, and now it's acting up. And so I looked online. It seems to be a common problem with a simple fix. And a lot of people, they spoke of how helpful the service center was when they called, which you never hear of, so I think that's great. So one person even said the service rep gave them his personal cell phone number so that after hours, when this person got home from work, he could call and the rep would help fix his machine that was on the fritz. So I think that's great. I call in, and I wait, and I wait, and I wait, and I don't know how long, and then finally I speak to someone, and the service rep has no clue. And she says to me, I kid you not, she says to me, did you try turning it on and off? And it's not fair. So she was entirely unhelpful. So it's not fixed, and it's not fair. I paid a lot of money for this machine, and I get this. Did you turn it on and off? And we feel that so often in life, don't we? It's not fair. It's not fair. It's tax season right now. Not fair. Not fair. Lacey she works a couple of days a week at UPMC and in Pittsburgh. So she'll ride the bus from Greensburg, and she'll go, and sometimes I'll take her and drop her off. And it's a giant bus, super, super nice bus. Looks brand new to me. I don't know. Giant bus. It goes all the way to Pittsburgh, and then another bus brings her back. And there might be, on a good day, 3 people riding the giant bus from Greensburg into Pittsburgh. They could use a Prius if they wanted to. They use a giant bus, and who knows how many hundreds of dollars a single trip on this bus costs to go back and forth. And who pays for that? Well, not Lacey. She doesn't pay for it. It's just a few dollars to buy a ticket to ride into town. So who pays for it? You pay for it with your taxes. So not fair to you? Wonderful for us. Thank you for paying for that giant bus for Lacey. Not fair to you, though. At work, what happens? You get blamed when your co-workers drop the ball, and everybody gets in trouble. Not fair. You're a kid and your sister gets a bigger piece of cake than you do with more icing. Not fair. Just ingrained in who we are. Not fair. At school, the teacher's pet gets the A's and you get an A-. Not fair. Your neighbor works less than you. In fact, you're not sure your neighbor works at all, and they drive nicer cars and take nicer vacations, and it's not fair. And then you take your kids to youth sports, and your kids are really talented, way above everyone else, and then everyone else gets a medal because there are no losers in youth sports today, and that's not fair. My kids are the best, and they deserve recognition above others. And this mindset just becomes how we see the world. This through a lens of fairness. We measure everything by fairness. It's ingrained in our souls so that life becomes a kind of mathematical equation then, where we're always measuring and always calculating, did I get my fair share? Did this work out equitably? And in a way that makes sense, and that I got what I deserve. That's what I want. And that is one way to live. It's one way to live. You're always assessing and calculating and feeling like you're owed something, like you deserve more, or that you deserve better, or you're always just a little bit disgruntled because you have a sense that something is not fair and it's affecting you, or you're a lot disgruntled because the scales of the day didn't balance like you thought maybe they should, and you even start to think that God owes you a little bit more than you're currently getting. And we look at the world and we think, well, generally, the last should be last, and the first should be first. And I should be first because I've worked hard, and it's not fair if I'm last. It's one way to live, and it's a tempting way to live. There's another way to live, and it's to live not by a system of fairness, but by a constant awareness of God's grace. By an awareness of God's grace. Now, please don't get me wrong. There are wrongs in this world that need to be righted. There are injustices. It's right to work hard and then be rewarded for that hard work. There are unfair things that need to be corrected. But if you only see the world through a lens of fairness, so that it defines everything for you and how you think, you need to know there is another way to live, and that is by God's grace. By God's grace, another way to see things. You know this, there's a man in our church, I don't even need to name him, because if you ask him how he's doing, he's always going to reply, better than I deserve, better than I deserve. And he's sincere. It's how he lives. It's how he sees things. And it is a profound theological response because it is true. He and we, all of us, are always doing better than we deserve. We have so much more than what we deserve. Those who live with a sense of God's grace, don't walk around constantly disgruntled with the unfairness of their lives. They don't walk around measuring their blessings against the blessings of their neighbor. They don't complain at the drop of a hat. That's not fair, not fair. They rejoice in what they have. And they see God's blessing and goodness in both plenty and in want. And they know they don't deserve anything. They don't deserve anything. And that means that every day, every moment, every breath, every conversation, every meeting with new people, every friendship, every little cent in the bank account, even if it's only a few little cents, every turn of the weather, all of it is by God's grace. And those who live by God's grace, their hearts are turned in gratitude to a God who has so abundantly provided, when they know they deserve none of it, nothing. We're good Reformed people. We're good Reformed people, so we know our Reformation solas, and we especially know grace alone, grace alone, grace alone. It is fundamental to who we are as a church. It's what we proclaim, grace alone, grace alone, grace alone. And yet, how many of us in reality live instead by the doctrine of fairness alone, fairness alone? And here in our passage today, Jesus tells a parable of a master who hires laborers for his vineyard. And Jesus is teaching us about how grace works in the kingdom of heaven. And look at the story here, verses 1 and 2. The master goes out early in the morning to hire laborers, and they agree to a wage of a denarius for a full day's work. It would have been a typical wage for a day's worth of work, a denarius. So they begin working in the vineyard. And if you're in the Song of Songs in Sunday school, you'll know a vineyard is often a biblical picture of God's people. It's an Old Testament picture of the nation of Israel. So here it is a picture paralleling all of that to the kingdom of heaven and the people of God and laboring in God's kingdom. They're laboring for the Lord in the kingdom of heaven. That's the idea here, the big picture of this parable. And these workers are called by the master to start work early in the morning. And the workday would have been divided into probably 3-hour segments, as is laid out here in this parable. Probably start around 6 a.m., finish around 6 p.m. from dawn to dusk, and every 3 hours as the day progresses, the parable goes on, the master hires more workers, all the way up to the 11th hour. At the 11th hour, verse 6, he hires a few more workers, and they only have 1 hour of work before quitting time, before dark. The others have been working all day. And so they are there just for an hour, and then it's time to pay them, verse 8. And the master wants to pay them beginning with the last workers to show up for that last hour. And look at what happens, verses 9 and 10. They get paid a denarius. They've only worked an hour. They get paid a denarius, which is a full day's wage. And you can imagine you're standing in line waiting to get paid, and these people that worked an hour got a full day's wage, and you've worked 12 hours, 12 days of work. You're going to get paid for us. You'll have it made. You'll have it made. And then they're paid. The people that worked at the very beginning of the morning, all day long, they get the same pay as those who only worked 1 hour, a single denarius. And so what do? They grumble. They grumble, verse 11. And let's just be straight up, it's not fair. It's not fair, it seems, what's happened here. It's not reasonable. It certainly seems to be a foolish business practice. Pay somebody a full day for an hour's worth of work, and it's not fair to those who worked all day. What message are you sending to them? And the workers express this, verse 12. These last worked only 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day in the scorching heat. It's been hard work all day, and you can understand their complaint. I would be grumbling too. A little bit ridiculous. What's wrong with this employer? It's like everything is turned upside down. Even just reading this parable, it makes us uncomfortable. We're a little bit perturbed. Who does this? Well, the master replies to their complaint with 3 questions. And first, verse 13, he says, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius?" This is the master saying, I've not violated the contract we made in any way. I'm giving you exactly what I promised I would give you. And what Jesus wants us to see is this is what God does for us. He always gives to us what he promises. His word is true. He does not cheat us or go back on his word. If he promises salvation, he gives salvation. He promises endurance through hardship. He gives endurance through hardship. If he promises to never leave you or forsake you, he will never leave you or forsake you. So why would you look at the blessings God happens to give to your neighbor and then think God is not being fair to you because your neighbor was blessed differently? You could, I suppose you could pray, God, give me what I deserve. I don't think that's a very good prayer to pray. Maybe instead we should remember all of the blessings God has given us that we don't deserve. By the rule of God's law, I am a sinner. I'm a sinner. I've broken God's commandments, the 10 commandments. I have systematically broken them. I am an adulterer because I've lusted in my heart. I'm a murderer because I've hated in my heart. I've coveted, and I've not always been honest, and I have not honored my parents, and I've not honored the Lord or loved the Lord as I should. And by the standard of God's law, I am, with the Apostle Paul, the chief of all sinners, and yet somehow, inexplicably, God has been gracious to me. He's been gracious to me. He's given me the blessing of Christ, who is now for me my salvation and my life and my greatest joy, and he's given me access to his throne of grace so I can pray to him, and he's given me friends and a family and this church family, and he's given me a giant dog who is this incredible pain and messy and expensive, but the stupid dog gets me out of the house in the evening to take walks with Lacey, which is an incredible blessing. So when I'm tempted to complain about the dog, I can remember the blessing the dog is, at least via these walks, which I don't deserve. I don't deserve any of it. How could I complain? How could any of us complain? How could we possibly complain? This is Israel in the wilderness, isn't it? God dramatically saves them, takes them by the hand, and defeats their enslaving enemies, the Egyptians, brings the plagues. He shows his power and might, and in showing his power and might, he manifests his love to this people who don't deserve anything, but he's chosen to love them, and he splits the water and leads them into the wilderness, and he promises them a home in a new land that will be itself a vineyard bearing wonderful fruit, where they will live under his presence and protection. And basically, he provides food and water for them. And the moment they start to move, they start to complain. And they forgot that they didn't deserve any of what God was giving them and promising them. And yet for them, whatever God did for them or gave to them, it was never enough, never enough, never enough. So they grumbled and complained against God. Why would we ever grumble if we had any idea of what God's grace means? Should be a distinguishing mark of God's people. God's people do not grumble. The world grumbles. Philippians 2 says, do all things without grumbling, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God, without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Isn't this interesting? What is it that sets us apart from this crooked and twisted generation to make us shine like lights in this world? Well, it seems to be we do all things without grumbling. We do all things without grumbling. When you do not grumble, at these 12-hour workers are grumbling. When you do not grumble, you are set apart and put on display as someone who has tasted and experienced the grace of God in receiving that which you did not deserve, far more than what you deserved. Powerful thing to not grumble, to not always say, it's not fair, it's not fair. We teach children what grace means through the acronym God's riches at Christ's expense. Grace, G-R-A-C-E, God's riches at Christ's expense. And that's what grace is. The very storehouses of the treasures of heaven have been opened to us, and it has come not at a cost to us, but at a cost to God, as he's offered up his own Son to crucifixion. And we have not deserved any of this love or blessing, and how could we possibly grumble? Okay, fine. Yes, I understand. I've received God's blessings. Amen, amen. But why does my neighbor seem to get more blessings? We know God's grace, but we still make comparisons. Go onto social media and you discover that your life does not measure up to your neighbor because it doesn't look like an Instagram filter, and you don't know how to do that, so you can't make your life, and you feel this small because your friends, their lives look like this, and you go to church and your neighbor's kids are quiet and still, and your kids are doing the limbo under the pews during the service, and why can't I have kids like that? Or maybe it's a serious thing. Why can't I have kids at all? Why can't I have a spouse? Why this sickness? Why this disease? Why this enduring pain? Why has so much gone wrong in my life? This is not what I envisioned when I was 19 years old and making my way out into the world. And then your neighbor, everything goes right. Everything goes right. God was good to us. He gave us this new boat. It's only a 60-footer, but we still thank God for. And you're just trying to afford gas to get to work. You're just trying to afford gas to get to work, and it hurts. And you think it's not fair. It's not fair because you're making comparisons. And look what happens here in the parable when these comparisons between what the master gives to us versus what he gives to others. When we start to make those comparisons, the master starts to ask these questions. We saw the first question, did you not agree with me for a denarius? And we saw he's true to his word. He was faithful in what he promised. Then there are two more questions, verse 15. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? And then also, or do you begrudge my generosity? And this forces the question, isn't God God? Isn't God God? And can't God distribute his blessings according to his own pleasure? Would you begrudge God an abundance of generosity to someone else? Would you begrudge God that? And would you fail to see God's generosity to you because you're so fixated on measuring your life with others so that you're always saying, it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not what I deserve. Those are terrifying words to say. It's not what I deserve. Not what I deserve by rights. Last summer, the day before we left for Africa, our roof was leaking in three places. We're going to be gone for a few weeks, and so I can't deal with it. And I'm imagining the bubbling up in the walls. I'm imagining the roof caving in, the walls falling over. And this isn't fair. I don't know anyone else whose roof is leaking in three places. What have we done to deserve this? And then we go to Africa and drive down the streets of Bulawayo in the morning, and you see people laying out in the open with some kind of blanket or something covering them because that's how they spend their nights. And fires burning because it's winter, out in the open, fires burning because it's winter, and they're trying to keep warm, and they don't have a roof to leak, and they don't have walls to fall down. And then you think, how can I possibly fail? How did I fail to see God's kindness? Generosity in giving me so much that I do not deserve. How could I miss that? Are we the kind of people who have learned to marvel at God's generosity? Or do we just get jealous when God is generous to others? If I were to give my children, if a parent were to give their children a gift out of nowhere, come home and say you happen to have 5 kids like me, and you give 4 of your kids brand new shoes, and they will love it. They will love you. Hip, cool. I don't know what's cool. Nikes, Vans, whatever. Really cool shoes, and they're excited. And and they're grateful, they're happy, they give you a big hug. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, thank you. And then the fifth kid, sweetie, I didn't get you new shoes. I got you a new car. And what have you done? You've now ruined and spoiled the gift you gave to the other four kids. Because what are they going to do? They're going to compare. Their gratitude and happiness is going to be gone. Dad, you got her a new car, and I got shoes. Yes, she got a car, you got shoes. You were grateful 2 seconds ago. Why aren't you grateful now? Some of us still live in that kind of jealousy and kind of childlike. It's not fair. It's not fair. Would you begrudge God's generosity to others? Or would you, as a sign of growing maturity, as a sign that you understand something of God's grace, would you be able to celebrate the good gifts that God so often gives to others, even when He doesn't necessarily give you those same gifts? Even as you are learning to celebrate your decidedly more humble gifts. The picture here is a vineyard. It's a picture of God's kingdom that needs laborers, and we need each other. And some will come into the kingdom at the very last minute of their lives, like a thief on a cross, or they'll wander into church and they'll look like they don't belong here because they have no idea what Christianity is, and they'll come to faith, and there could be a temptation to perhaps treat some as sort of second-class citizens. We've been here for years and years and years. I built this church, 1860. I was here and I laid those stones, and you except for that part that looks like it's cracking right up there now that I'm looking at it. I didn't do that, but and you have this, we've been here, and so you have a place up here. You expect it, and you've given your time and your money, and you want to be recognized. And then this new person that just walked in, that just learned the name of Jesus and came to faith, and out of a messy, awful life is showered with grace and blessings, and you've been working all along, and can you celebrate God's grace in their lives when you have toiled and toiled in the kingdom? And we need each other in this toil, whether someone comes in at the last minute or someone who's been toiling all along. We need to learn to celebrate the goodness of God's grace together, because it is hard work in the scorching sun of this world, and we need everyone. And as we remember that, do you see how good God has been to you in your life? He's not been fair. He's not. He's been gracious and merciful beyond what you could ever conceive. And so this makes us then nothing but unworthy servants in His kingdom, because whatever we have is not what we deserved. It is what His grace has given to us. 2 Timothy 1:9 says, God saved us and called us to a holy calling, not because of our works, but because of His own purpose and grace. God gave us grace. He gave us grace, and it is a gift that turns everything upside down. The economy of God's kingdom does not follow the world's doctrine of fairness. Fairness is familiar, comfortable. It is our default position. Grace is strange. Grace is extraordinary, and it is shocking to the eyes that are only set on fairness, because it is grace that makes the last first and the first last. And dear friends, are you able to rejoice in this grace this morning as God distributes it freely according to His measure and pleasure to all who belong to His kingdom? And are you able to recognize that you are only an unworthy servant? What we have received, we've not deserved it. We've not deserved it. And let's celebrate that grace as we come to this table this morning where we receive Christ, whom we have not deserved. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word and this parable this morning and how it